So another very important topic in Grasshopper and Rhino is how do you actually export or import Rhino geometry into Grasshopper? Let's say if you want to work with something that you have already drawn in Rhino, how could I now reference this information into Grasshopper and actually make it dynamic? So every time I actually change the position of, let's say, a point, Grasshopper can understand it, but still reference that point. Now for that, what we actually have are all of those components here marked with a black hexagon. You can find most of them actually in the first cluster group, which is the params, and in the geometry tab, and also in the primitive tab. Now let's look at what different objects do we actually have in Rhino that we can actually export or import into Rhino and Grasshopper. The first very basic thing would be a point. So you can find in the first icon actually is a point that you can now reference. So if I click on this and drag it into my canvas, I could always just type it in. So I take the point. And I remember that the hexagon actually will help me to import geometry from Rhino. So I take this here, and you can see if I hover over the balloon, it's just going to tell me floating parameter of point failed to collect data. How do I now reference this component to a point in Rhino? I do it by just clicking with my right mouse button onto this middle icon here. Let's always try to be precise and just do it in the middle of this component. I click there and I want to go to set one point. And if I do so, actually the Grasshopper canvas will disappear, and you are now in Rhino going to be asked in the command line to select a point that you want to reference. I have drawn a point here, so I'm going to reference that. And you can see now this point is actually referenced in Rhino. So again, right mouse button click and set one point. So select that point. If you have nothing drawn, that's something you can just then take this icon, select just single point, define a location. And let's say you want to change that now. You can again set one point and overwrite what you have given him as a basic information. The nice thing about this is if I now choose or move my point, it's still going to be referenced to this component. I'll have still this information, and it's clever enough to understand that the position has changed, but we'll always be able to reference that point. Now let's say you want to have both of those points. How do you do that? Well, you go again to this component, right mouse button click, and this time instead of having set one point, you say set multiple points. You select cell multiple points, same game. You have again the command line telling you something, and you just simply select both of the points. And you can see also in blue now the order of how it's actually referencing those points. And if I want to display it even more precise, I can just add some more points, just 4 of them. And again, I go to my component, set multiple points, and then I select my multiple points, and you can see in which order I have selected them. Okay, now let's say you want to change the order of the selection. You go in this case to manage point, and then you can just shuffle them around, and this will then basically just allow you to identify or reorder your point selection within Grasshopper. So that's something that you could do. Okay, so this is the first basic thing that we have learned. So how do we import points? But now let's understand what other geometries actually we can import and how they are called in Grasshopper. Okay, so now that we know how to import a point, let's look at how we could, for instance, import lines. Lines and curves, that is. There are different options that we could actually use to, let's say, import a line. Now, if you just type in line, you will get a component which again with the black hexagon will tell me this is a component that will help me to import geometry. And you can see I have a line drawn here, but what this component will do actually, if you just right click on it and say I want to set one line, it will now just say start of the line and then end of the line. So you can actually draw a line yourself now. So if I just redraw that line, for instance, it is now inside Grasshopper. But it is not referenced to that line that I had before. And we will see how we can actually reference that line. But this line component, for instance, what it does, it just allows you to draw in Rhino your lines that you want to import. Let's say I want to have multiple, and now you have that. But the sad thing about this is now you can't actually change the position, let's say, and it will not be referenced to that. So for that, what you can do is just have a curve a curve component. And this curve component actually, if you now set one curve, it will now let you set one curve. And you can select a line, you can select a polyline, which has more than one line segment, that's a polyline, but also it will allow you to set one curve, literally a curve that you can now import. And if you go here, you can see that you can also have a different component for circular arcs. Let's say you have your circle, which you can define. So just set one circle, and again, you can draw a circle yourself. But in a basic nutshell, what you should do is maybe just use the curve component if you want to access a line that is in Rhinoceros. And that's something you can do. Now, there's another interesting feature which I could use here. Let's say I have drawn a closed curve in Rhino, right? And I want to import it now into my Grasshopper canvas. I can again use a curve for that, right? And then set one curve with right mouse button click. I set this curve, and I have this closed curve now. And it's a closed planar curve. That means it's planar to the XY plane. And if I click on surface, which is again a component and lets me reference surfaces, I can click on this and say set one surface, and I can basically click on this surface, and this will now allow me to reference this surface. Now let's look at an option which is also very interesting. Let's say I bring in back another curve, type in curve, and I set this curve to this circle. And again, this circle is a planar curve. That means X, Y are planar to the respective plane. What the interesting thing with this surface is, it can convert a closed curve into a surface. As you can see now, this is recognized as surface. And if I want to bake, I do it again, right mouse button click, brings in the options of the component. I click on this egg here and just say okay. And now you can see it's actually a surface. I delete that. So interesting thing that those components can do, they can also convert some basic information. They can basically convert data also. So they take, like, let's say, closed curve and put it into a surface. Okay, so let's just finish this off with the different types of geometry that you actually have in Rhino, and then what you can convert into Grasshopper. So you have surfaces. Those are, like I already showed you, your basic surfaces. This is a basic surface, and I can also have let's say cylinder as a surface. This is also now a surface. But let's look at what happens if I have polysurface, right? A polysurface is basically a group of some surfaces that are grouped together. And if I want to reference that, I can't. I can't reference this as a surface. It's not letting me. I can reference the closed volume as a surface, right? But I cannot get this as a closed surface because it's not a surface in how Rhino and Grasshopper understands it. So if I want to bring in something like that, I need to have a different type. And the type, if I go again to geometry, I can have a look what kind of different situations or different components I have. And the one thing that is what I need is a B-rep. A B-rep in Grasshopper is the same as in Rhino, your extrusions, your volumes, and your closed solids. That's more or less how you can define them. So there are extrusions, either they're called extrusions or polysurfaces. So either they're like watertight and they are volumes, you can import them as B-reps, but also opened polysurfaces can be B-reps. And if I click on this B-rep, for instance, and select one B-rep, I can now reference this polysurface as a B-rep. But I can also reference my surface as a B-rep. I can also reference my volume as a B-rep. So a B-rep is a much more top-level component, which will let you import your B-reps, but you cannot convert a B-rep to surface if it's not a surface. And what I mean with that, if I select now my polysurface again, and just want to plug it into my surface and just pretend that it is actually a surface, I can't do that. It will not allow, this component cannot convert the B-rep that I've assigned, which is a polysurface, into a surface. So let's not make it too complicated. In a nutshell, what you have surfaces and you have B-reps. B-reps again can be watertight volumes, but it can also be polysurface, extrusion, etc. So it's just a more top-level data type. Now, the last thing that we have that I want to show you here is going to be a mesh. Now, if you type in a mesh, you can import a mesh. And for instance, this is a mesh that I've created, a mesh sphere, and you can see it if I just quickly hide this. A mesh is basically made up of mesh faces. So this sphere, for instance, is made up of mesh faces, which I can select actually. And you can see here, the mesh faces are either triangles, or in this case, are basically rectangles, but they're flat. And this is how a mesh is always built up. So you have volumetric models of meshes, so they can be even more complex than the sphere, but they're always made up of flat surfaces, which are again either triangles or flat rectangular shapes. Those are basically meshes. And you can then, again, if you want to import a mesh, you cannot just do it with the brep because the data type is wrong. It can't select that as a brep because it's not, it's a mesh. So for that, I have this mesh component, and I can now set one mesh, and it will allow me to import that mesh. So as we go along, we will see other data types, but it's very important for you in the beginning to understand that we have points, curves, which are separated in lines, polylines, and basically curves, NURBS curves. You have surfaces, and in the curves you also have closed curves, you have surfaces, but then extrusions, polysurface, and volumes are actually breps, called breps, and then you also have meshes. So those are the basic types that we need to understand, and now we can proceed to look at how to script them. Hi, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please feel free to leave a comment, a like, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Also note that this video is part of a 13-hour-long online tutorial series called Algorithmic Skyscraper Design. You can find it on my e-learning platform, Design Upgrade. That is courses.design-upgrade.com. To get access to all online courses, just sign up and secure yourself an all-access membership. Choose one of the many courses available with one new added course each month. In the Algorithmic Skyscraper Design, I will take you from zero to hero for practice-based visual scripting inside Rhino. Learn also to create advanced environmental simulations and design user interfaces with Grasshopper. So see you there, and let us make some design upgrades.